It had been 3 years since David passed away, and yet Clara Mitchell still found herself setting 2 coffee mugs on the kitchen counter every morning. One for her, one for him. Old habits die hard, especially when they are tied to love. The house in Portland had once been full of laughter and warmth. Now it was quiet, too quiet. The only sounds were the ticking clock and the wind pressing against the windows. Clara worked from home as a freelance editor. Her days predictable, her evenings long. She had learned to keep herself busy, though deep down she knew she was only avoiding the silence. It was on a gray afternoon in early March when she heard the sound of tires crunching the wet driveway. She wasn't expecting anyone. When she opened the door, she froze. Standing there with a travel bag slung over one shoulder and his hair damp from rain was Ethan, David's son. He looked older, taller, and his eyes carried a quiet sadness she recognized all too well. "Ethan," she said softly, half surprised, half relieved. "Hey, Mom," he said with a tired smile. He still called her that, even though she wasn't his mother by blood. She stepped aside. "Come in, you're soaked." As he walked in, the smell of rain and pine filled the hallway. Clara handed him a towel, watching as he brushed the water from his dark hair. For a moment she saw David in him, the same jawline, the same steady calm in his eyes. It tugged at her heart. "I just needed a break," Ethan said, setting down his bag. "Seattle's been too much lately. School, work, everything." "You can stay as long as you want," Clara said without thinking. And she meant it. That evening, the house came alive again. They cooked together simple pasta and garlic bread. It felt like old times, but different somehow. Ethan was no longer the shy 17-year-old who used to visit during summer. He was a man now, confident, thoughtful, gentle. His presence filled the quiet spaces in the house that had felt hollow for so long. After dinner, they sat in the living room. Rain pattered softly against the windows while the fireplace crackled. Clara poured 2 cups of tea and they talked for hours about his studies, his friends, the city, his struggles with loneliness. She listened, really listened, and he did the same. "It's strange," Ethan said, his voice low. "Coming back here feels safe, like I can breathe again." Clara smiled faintly. "It's still your home." He looked at her, eyes soft. "It feels more like home when you're here." For a moment, she didn't know how to respond. There was warmth in his words, comfort even, but something else lingered, something deeper. She brushed it off, blaming her own loneliness for reading too much into it. Days turned into a quiet rhythm. They fell into an easy routine: morning coffee together, long walks through the nearby park, shared dinners. Sometimes he'd help her fix small things around the house. The leaky faucet, the squeaky door, the broken lamp that had sat untouched for months. Every act of care felt like a small gift. At night, Clara found herself lying awake, thinking about how different the house felt now. The laughter, the smell of coffee, the sound of footsteps again, it all made her feel human, alive. She hadn't realized how much she missed having someone around. How much she missed being seen. One evening she found Ethan in the living room sketching designs in a worn notebook. He had always been passionate about architecture. His drawings were sharp and precise, full of life. She sat beside him, watching quietly. "These are beautiful," she said. He smiled. "Thanks. I haven't shown them to anyone in a while." "Should," she said. "You have real talent." He looked at her then, his gaze steady, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "You always say the right thing." Her cheeks warmed. "I just tell the truth." There was a pause, long enough for the air between them to feel charged, though neither spoke of it. Clara stood up quickly, forcing a light laugh. "I'll get us some tea." In the kitchen, she steadied herself against the counter, trying to ignore the flutter in her chest. She told herself it was nothing, just emotions misplaced by years of solitude. Ethan was family after all. But when she returned to the living room, the way he looked up at her, genteel, grateful, a little too long, made her question everything. As the days passed, that feeling only grew. They began to talk about deeper things, about loss, dreams, regrets. Ethan confessed how hard it was to live up to his father's image, how he sometimes felt like he wasn't enough. Clara shared how empty life had felt since David's passing, how she had learned to survive but not to live. Those late-night talks built a bridge between them, one made of honesty and unspoken understanding. One morning, Clara found an old photo album on the shelf. She opened it and saw pictures of her and David smiling at their wedding, Ethan standing beside them in his teenage awkwardness. She felt a lump in her throat. Time had moved so fast. And now, here they were again, in the same house, with the same rain outside, but everything had changed. When Ethan came downstairs, she closed the album quickly. He noticed. "You miss him a lot, don't you?" "Every day," she said softly. He nodded. "So do I." For a moment, their eyes met. The same loss reflected in both. It was a silent bond, one neither of them could deny. That night, as the wind howled outside, Clara sat alone in her room. From the hallway, she heard faint music playing from Ethan's room, a soft, slow tune she remembered David used to love. It made her heart ache, but also, strangely, it soothed her. She stood by the doorway, listening for a moment, then whispered to herself, maybe some things never really leave. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring. She only knew that for the first time in years. She didn't dread waking up. The silence no longer scared her, because now someone else was breathing in that same space, bringing warmth back into the cold corners of her life. Clara looked out the window at the rain, the city lights glowing in the distance. There was still sadness, still grief, but there was also something new, a quiet pull toward something she didn't yet understand, something she was afraid to name, and though she didn't know it yet, that small spark born out of loneliness, kindness, and quiet understanding would soon change everything. The rain had returned to Portland, steady and soft, painting the windows with streaks of silver. It was a Saturday evening, the kind where the sky stayed gray all day and the streets looked washed clean. Inside the kitchen, the smell of roasted vegetables and garlic filled the air. Clara and Ethan moved easily around each other, laughing at small things, teasing about who cooked better. For the first time in years, the house felt alive. Filled with sounds that weren't just echoes of memory, Clara stood by the stove, stirring sauce, when the spoon slipped from her hand and clattered to the floor. She bent down at the same moment Ethan did, and their hands brushed. Just a touch, nothing more. But it lingered longer than it should have. Her heart gave a quick, uneasy flutter. She straightened quickly, forcing a smile. "Got it," she said, her voice lighter than she felt. Ethan didn't look away. His eyes searched hers for a second, too long before he finally smiled back. "You always drop something when you cook." She laughed softly, trying to shake off the moment. "Maybe I just need better help in the kitchen." He grinned, that easy, boyish grin that made her chest tighten unexpectedly. "Then I guess you're lucky I'm here." They finished dinner together, talking about simple things, the rain, the smell of cedar outside, the new movie he wanted to watch. But beneath the small talk, Clara felt a shift, the kind of quiet awareness that grows between two people when neither is brave enough to name it. After dinner, Ethan cleared the table while Clara poured tea. The flicker of candlelight cast warm shadows on the walls. It was peaceful, almost too peaceful, the kind of stillness where every heartbeat feels loud. "You don't have to clean up," she said softly. "I don't mind," he replied, wiping the counter. "It gives me something to do." She hesitated, then asked, "Are you okay, Ethan? You've seemed different lately." He paused, resting his hands on the table. "I guess I just feel stuck. I thought going back to Seattle would make me feel better. But it didn't. Everything feels empty." Clara nodded slowly. She understood that emptiness too well. "You're not alone in that," she said gently. Ethan looked at her then, really looked. "You don't have to keep pretending you're okay either, Clara." The words hit her harder than she expected. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. He had seen through her calm, through the quiet strength she wore like armor. "I'm fine," she said finally, her voice low. He shook his head. "No, you're not. You're lonely." The room went silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator. His honesty caught her off guard, but it was true. She was lonely. She had been for a long time. Her eyes stung, but she smiled weakly. That's part of life, isn't it? Learning to live with empty spaces. Ethan stepped closer, his expression gentle. You don't have to. Something in his tone tender, but firm made her heart race. She could feel the air change, heavier somehow. For a second, she thought about stepping back, about ending the moment before it turned into something they couldn't take back. But she didn't move. Instead, she whispered, You remind me of him sometimes, Dad. Ethan asked softly. She nodded. In little ways, the way you think before you speak, the way you try to fix things that are broken. He smiled faintly. Guess I learned that from him. She returned his smile, though it trembled. Be proud of you. Ethan's eyes softened. He'd be grateful you're still here, keeping this house alive. Clara looked down, her voice barely a whisper. Some days I don't feel alive. Without thinking, Ethan reached out and touched her hand. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like the world slowed down around them. She should have pulled away. She didn't. He didn't say anything more, and neither did she. They just stood there in the golden light of the kitchen, two people connected by grief, comfort, and something unspoken that neither of them dared to name. Later that night, Clara sat on the couch with a blanket wrapped around her. The rain had turned to mist, and the sound of distant thunder echoed softly. She turned on the fireplace, letting the warmth fill the room. A few minutes later, Ethan walked in quietly and sat beside her, holding a cup of tea. You couldn't sleep either, she asked. He shook his head. Too many thoughts. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling gently. Clara stared at the flames, remembering how David used to sit there reading his favorite novels. The faint smile that always curved his lips. She missed him every day, but that ache had softened over time. What she hadn't expected was the new ache that had taken its place, something softer. Confusing, but undeniably real. Your dad loved nights like this, she said quietly. Ethan nodded. Yeah, he said storms made him feel calm. She smiled at the memory. He used to say they reminded him that chaos could still be beautiful. Ethan leaned back, eyes fixed on the fire. He was right. Clara looked at him. Then, really seeing him, the lines of his face, the kindness in his eyes, the quiet strength in his voice. It wasn't just the resemblance to David that moved her. It was Ethan himself, his empathy, his warmth, the way he looked at her as if she mattered again. She turned away quickly, guilt tightening in her chest. This wasn't supposed to happen. This was her late husband's son. Yet her heart refused to follow rules. It only knew the feeling of being seen again, of being understood. The room grew quieter. Ethan's voice broke the silence, soft and unsure. Clara, can I ask you something? Of course, she said, her tone gentle. Do you ever think about starting over? The question surprised her. Starting over? Yeah, finding happiness again. In a new way, she stared into the fire. I used to think it wasn't possible. It's that once you lose someone like David, that part of your heart just stays closed forever. Ethan nodded. Maybe some parts don't close. Maybe they just wait for the right person to remind you you're still alive. Clara's breath caught. She looked at him, unsure what to say. There was a sadness in his eyes, but also something brave, something that told her he wasn't just talking about her healing. She wanted to stop the moment, to draw a line between what was right and what was not. But she didn't. Maybe it was the firelight, maybe the loneliness, or maybe the way Ethan looked at her as if she still had something beautiful left inside her. They sat together until the fire burned low and the clock struck midnight. Neither said another word. When Ethan finally stood to go upstairs, he paused, hesitating. Good night, Clara, he said softly. Good night, Ethan, she replied, her voice trembling just slightly. When he was gone, Clara closed her eyes, feeling her heartbeat echo in the quiet room. She knew the line between comfort and something more had begun to blur. And though part of her wanted to run from it, another part, one she hadn't felt in years, wanted to see where it might lead. She told herself it was just care, just warmth, nothing more. But as she stared at the dying fire, she knew deep down that things had already begun to change, and she wasn't sure she wanted to stop it. Spring arrived quietly, washing away the gray of winter. The garden behind Clara's house began to bloom again lavender, daisies, and the old rose bush David had planted years ago. For the first time in a long time, Clara found herself opening the windows wide and letting sunlight pour in. The house no longer felt like a place frozen in memory. It felt alive again, and she knew it had everything to do with Ethan. He had been living with her for nearly 2 months now. What started as a temporary visit had turned into something neither wanted to end. Ethan filled the silence with laughter, warmth, and quiet acts of kindness. He fixed broken things around the house, repaired the front steps, even painted the old porch railings. He said he wanted to keep busy, but Clara knew it was his way of taking care of her. One afternoon, she brought him lemonade while he worked on the porch. Sweat glistened on his forehead and his shirt clung to his back from the spring sun. Clara felt a strange flutter in her chest, a sudden awareness she tried to ignore. She placed the glass beside him and smiled. "You don't have to do all this, you know." He wiped his hands and looked up at her. "I want to. This place means a lot to me." She nodded. "It meant a lot to your father, too." Ethan hesitated, then said softly, "Maybe that's why I want to keep it standing." Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, neither moved. Clara turned away, pretending to admire the garden. "Well," she said lightly, "I appreciate it." Later that evening, they sat together on the porch swing he had just repaired. The sunset was soft and golden, painting the sky in warm colors. Clara leaned back, letting the rhythm of the swing calm her. Ethan sat beside her, his shoulder close enough to feel but not touch. "You ever think about the future?" he asked after a moment. "All the time," she said, her voice low. "But I try not to. It hurts less that way." He turned toward her. "It doesn't have to hurt." Clara glanced at him. His expression was calm but full of meaning. She felt her heart twist. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "we can't choose what hurts." Ethan didn't respond. He just looked at her with an understanding that made her chest tighten. She stood up quickly, needing distance. "I'm going to start dinner," she said, and walked inside before he could answer. That night Clara couldn't sleep. She lay awake, listening to the sound of rain against the windows. Her thoughts kept circling back to Ethan, his voice, his kindness, the quiet strength he carried. It scared her how easily she had come to rely on him, how deeply she felt connected to him. It wasn't supposed to be this way. The next morning she found him already in the kitchen making pancakes. He looked up and smiled. "Morning, sleepyhead." She laughed softly. "You're making breakfast now, trying to earn my keep," he said. As they ate, the air between them felt lighter again, almost normal. But Clara noticed how his gaze lingered a second too long when she laughed, how he leaned a little closer when he spoke. And she noticed something else she didn't mind it. The days that followed were filled with simple moments that seemed to pull them closer together without words. They planted new flowers, watched old movies, shared stories late into the night. And somewhere between laughter and silence, something unspoken grew, something both of them felt but couldn't name. One afternoon they drove to the coast. The ocean stretched endlessly before them, wild and blue. The salty wind tangled Clara's hair, and Ethan smiled as he handed her his jacket. "You always forget how cold it gets here," he teased. She wrapped herself in the warmth of it, feeling safe. "I guess I've forgotten a lot of things," she said softly. They walked along the shore, their shoes sinking into the wet sand. Clara talked about David, about how they used to visit the same spot every year. Ethan listened quietly, his gaze thoughtful. "He really loved you," Ethan said. Clara nodded. "And I loved him." Her voice broke slightly, but love changes after someone's gone. It doesn't disappear, it just becomes something different. He nodded slowly. "Maybe it becomes part of who we are." When she looked at him, she saw something in his eyes that startled her. It wasn't pity, it was affection, real, deep affection. the kind that made her heart ache and her breath quicken. She turned away, pretending to watch the waves. We should head back before it gets dark. They didn't speak much on the drive home. But in the quiet hum of the car, Clara felt the air between them heavy with unspoken thoughts. That night, she stood in front of the mirror in her room, brushing her hair. She looked at her reflection, the faint lines around her eyes, the gray strands near her temples. She wasn't young anymore, okay? And yet, for the first time in years, she felt beautiful. Not because of how she looked, but because she felt seen again. A soft knock came at her door. Ethan's voice followed. "Clara, the power just went out. I think a fuse blew." She opened the door, holding a flashlight. The house was dark except for the flicker of candles downstairs. They found the breaker box and Ethan managed to fix it after a few tries. When the lights came back, they both laughed in relief. "Guess I'm still useful." He joked. "You've been more help than you know," Clara said quietly. Their laughter faded, and suddenly silence filled the space again. He was standing close now, his eyes searching hers, uncertain but full of emotion. "Clara," he began, but stopped. She waited, her pulse quickening. "What is it?" He shook his head lightly. "Nothing. I'm glad I came back." She smiled softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "So am I." When he turned to leave, she felt something inside her ache, a longing she couldn't explain. She wanted to tell him to stay, to say something, anything. But the words wouldn't come. She only watched as he disappeared up the stairs. That night, Clara stood by the window, watching the rain. She knew something had changed between them. It wasn't just comfort anymore. It wasn't just shared grief. It was something neither of them could control, something quiet, tender, and real. And though she told herself it was wrong to feel this way, her heart didn't listen. Because what she felt wasn't reckless, it was human. Two lonely hearts, finding warmth in the same storm. She closed her eyes, whispering into the darkness. Maybe some lines aren't meant to keep us apart. Maybe they're meant to show us what we're afraid to feel. And in that quiet confession, she knew whatever this was between her and Ethan, it wasn't something she could deny anymore. Autumn came with golden leaves and soft rain. The air grew cooler, and the days felt shorter. For Clara, it was both beautiful and bittersweet. Ethan's stay was coming to an end. He had received a job offer in Seattle, a dream opportunity at a respected architecture firm. She was proud of him, truly proud. But every time she thought of him leaving, her heart tightened in quiet pain. They didn't talk about it much. It was easier to pretend things were the same, to drink coffee in the mornings, to share laughter in the evenings, to sit on the porch watching the sun dip below the trees. But beneath every smile, there was something unsaid. A silence too fragile to break. One evening, as the wind scattered leaves across the yard, Ethan stood by the window, lost in thought. Clara entered the room, a soft smile on her face. "You've been staring out there for 10 minutes, she said gently. He turned, smiling faintly. "Just thinking about how fast time went." "It always does when we don't want it to," she replied. They stood there for a moment, the golden light of sunset reflecting between them. Everything felt calm, but inside, Clara's heart raced. She wanted to tell him that his presence had changed her life, that he had brought warmth back into a house that once felt like a tomb. But the words stayed trapped in her chest. The next morning she found him packing his things. His suitcase lay open on the bed, neatly folded clothes inside. She stood in the doorway for a long moment before speaking. "You're really leaving tomorrow?" He nodded. "Yeah, I start Monday." "Wonderful," she said, forcing a smile. "I know how much this means to you." He looked up. "It means a lot, but—" He hesitated. "It's not easy to leave." Clara's voice softened. "I know." Ethan sat down on the edge of the bed, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't expect this," he said quietly. "Coming here, it was supposed to be just a visit, but it turned into something else." She stepped closer, her breath unsteady. "Something else?" He looked up at her, his eyes raw with emotion. "You know what I mean, Clara?" For a moment, neither of them moved. The air between them felt alive, full of things they hadn't said for weeks. She wanted to tell him that she felt it too, that his presence had healed her in ways she didn't think were possible. But the truth scared her. "Ethan," she said gently, "we've both been through a lot. Sometimes feelings get tangled when people are hurting." He shook his head. "This isn't confusion. Not for me." She turned away, her heart pounding. "Even if it's real, it can't be simple." He stood up, his voice steady but tender. "Maybe it doesn't have to be simple. Maybe it just has to be honest." Clara felt tears rise, but blinked them away. She wanted to stop this conversation, to protect them both from what might follow. But when she met his gaze, she saw nothing reckless only kindness, affection, and understanding. He took a slow step closer. "You taught me something," he said softly. "That love isn't about what's right on paper. It's about what makes us feel alive." Clara's throat tightened. "And what if feeling alive costs us everything?" He smiled sadly. "Then at least we know we truly lived." For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then she whispered, "You should finish packing." He nodded. But before turning away, he said quietly, "I'll miss you more than you'll ever know." When he left the room, Clara sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling. The words she didn't say burned inside her. She wanted to run after him, to tell him she would miss him too. But she stayed still, afraid that if she spoke, her heart would betray her completely. The next day, the sky was gray again. A fine drizzle covered the yard as Ethan loaded his bags into the car. Clara stood on the porch, holding a cup of coffee, her fingers cold despite the warmth. He came to her and smiled. "I'll call you when I get there." "You'd better," she said softly. "Drive safe, okay?" He nodded, then hesitated. "Clara." She met his eyes. "I don't know what to call what we had, but it's real to me." Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. "It's real to me too," she whispered. He stepped forward and pulled her into a gentle embrace. It wasn't the kind of hug you give out of politeness or habit. It was full of meaning, of goodbye, of something neither could put into words. She closed her eyes, memorizing the way his heartbeat felt against hers, knowing she would carry that moment with her long after he drove away. When he let go, his voice was soft but steady. "You'll be okay?" She nodded. "I will. You should go chase your dreams now." He gave a small, bittersweet smile. "You helped me remember I still had them." Clara watched as he walked to the car, his figure growing smaller with each step. When the engine started and the tires rolled down the driveway, she stood frozen, her heart breaking and healing at the same time. The car turned the corner and disappeared into the rain. Inside the house, the silence returned. But it wasn't the same silence as before. It wasn't heavy or hollow. It was peaceful, like the calm after a storm. Days passed. The leaves fell, and the air grew colder. Clara returned to her routines, editing manuscripts, watering the plants, making tea in the evenings. Yet everything felt subtly different. She noticed small things she hadn't before: the sound of the wind through the trees, the warmth of morning light, the way life quietly continued. Sometimes, when she passed by the porch swing, she would pause and remember that evening in the golden light. The laughter, the unspoken feelings, the way Ethan had looked at her as if she were something precious. Those memories hurt, but they also gave her strength. One evening, weeks later, she received a message. It was from Ethan. "Hey, Clara, just wanted to say the new job is going great. I miss the house, and I miss you." She smiled, tears forming in her eyes. She typed back, "I miss you too, Ethan. I'm proud of you." He replied, "You taught me how to start over. Thank you." Clara sat back in her chair, staring at the message. Her heart felt full of sadness, yes, but also of gratitude. For the first time since David's death, she didn't feel trapped in grief. She had found a way to love again, even if it wasn't meant to last forever. She stood by the window, watching the rain. The world outside was quiet and beautiful. The porch light flickered gently, the same one Ethan had fixed for her in that soft glow. She whispered to herself he wanted more. And maybe, deep down, so did I. But she wasn't ashamed of it, because what they shared wasn't about rules or labels. It was about two hearts finding warmth in the coldest season of their lives. As she turned off the light and headed to bed, she smiled. The ache was still there, but so was peace. Life had given her something unexpected, a reminder that love could still find her, even when she thought it never would.